welcome to this episode of the Connecticut Veterans for Peace Show. Today I'm joined by an esteemed guest working in nuclear disarmament, among other issues. Ira, thank you so much for being here. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and how you came to work on the abolishment of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, well, Matt, first, thanks so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure talking with you. My name is Ira Helfand. I'm a retired emergency room doctor and also spent the last 15 years of my medical career doing addiction medicine and primary care internal medicine. But I've always been involved, since I started my medical career, in advocacy for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And this is an issue which I first became involved with when I was an intern 1 year out of medical school, and started an organization in Boston called Physicians for Social Responsibility, which was concerned with educating the public about the dangers posed by nuclear technology. Initially nuclear power, and then very quickly we shifted our focus to nuclear weaponry. And our central contention was that this is primarily a public health issue, that nuclear weapons are the greatest threat to public health that have ever existed. And that needs to be the starting point for any conversation about nuclear policy. And what we found over the years is that most of the times when governments are talking to each other about what they're going to do with their nuclear weapons, it's like this elaborate game of chess they're playing. And there are rules of this game, and the conversation they have always leads to the continuation of the arms race. But if you change the conversation, if you start by saying, okay, what's going to happen when these weapons are used, you get a totally different conversation. Because when you consider what's going to happen if these weapons are used, the only possible conclusion is we have to make sure they never are used, and the only way to do that is to get rid of them. And then the question becomes, okay, so how do we do that? Not should we do that, but simply how do we do that? And that's the message we've tried to bring to the public, to government leaders. Our group, Physicians for Social Responsibility here in the United States, grew into an international federation called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. We have affiliates now in over 30 countries around the world, including all of the nuclear armed states, including North Korea. And we are trying to advocate for the elimination of these weapons for the countries which have them, to sit down and work out the details of a treaty, of an agreement that would specify the verification mechanisms, the enforcement mechanisms, the specific timetable for eliminating their weapons.
It's greatly needed, especially in the times that we're in, times of great peril. I'm curious, what do you feel people in general misunderstand about the use of nuclear weapons and their impact on life as we know it, both from a limited nuclear weapons deployment perspective and a full-scale nuclear war perspective?
Yeah. I think there are two main things that people don't understand fully about nuclear weapons. The first is that we actually can have a nuclear war. People have dismissed this from their minds. You know, back in the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War, everyone was terrified there was going to be a nuclear war. We knew that this could happen. But when the Cold War ended, we all made the mistake of assuming that the danger had passed. It was less. In the 1990s, there was less chance there'd be a nuclear war than in the 1980s. But the danger didn't go away, and most importantly, the weapons didn't go away. Tens of thousands of nuclear warheads remained in the world, kind of waiting for things to go bad again. And they've gone bad again in a very, very significant way. Probably beginning, well, even before this, but really the first Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 just made it clear that this supposed end to the nuclear weapons threat was an illusion, that it was still possible that great nuclear powers could find themselves in direct military conflict, and that could lead to nuclear war. And we're now in a situation where, you know, according to experts like former Defense Secretary William Perry, and he said this back in 2018, the danger of nuclear war is greater now than it's ever been. Now, that was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has elevated that risk even further. So that's the first thing I think people don't understand fully and need to understand. Nuclear war is not something that we read about in the history books, that we worried about in the 1980s, but that we don't need to worry about anymore. The fact is that we are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been. And if we continue on the path that we're on, I think we're going to have a nuclear war.
Mm.
The second thing that people, I think, don't fully understand is how bad a nuclear war will be. And it's interesting because people do think they understand it. I mean, if you ask someone, they tell you nuclear war is going to be terrible. They might even use the phrase, it would be the end of the world. But that phrase is almost like a throwaway to sort of keep from facing the reality of what the end of the world would really look like.
Mm.
And that people have forgotten. And so it's very unpleasant, but a lot of the time when I'm speaking with audiences, one of the things I do is describe what's going to happen if there is a nuclear war. Because I think it's important for us to understand that. And as you suggested, it's not just a large-scale nuclear war between the United States and Russia that we need to worry about, but even a much more limited nuclear war, as might take place between smaller nuclear powers like India and Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
would also have absolutely catastrophic effects, not just in the countries which fight the war, but because of the climate disruption throughout the entire world.
Mm. Paint the picture for us. What would it look like? And take India and Pakistan as an example. A nuclear war breaks out. What can we expect?
Well, you know, the most detailed study of what would happen in a war between India and Pakistan was published in the journal Nature Food in the summer of 2022. And it looked at that study looked at a number of different scenarios, different numbers of weapons used, different strength weapons used. I think the most important thing to know was that the scenario that they looked at, which has the greatest impact on the world, but is not by any means a worst case scenario, was one in which India and Pakistan together used 250 of their weapons. They have over 350 weapons now, and the number is growing every day. But this scenario assumed they used 250 of their weapons, and assumed that each of these weapons was about 100 kilotons, about 6 times bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. The direct effects in South Asia are unbelievably catastrophic. Over 100 million people die in an afternoon.
Wow.
But that's only part of the story, because the fires caused by these weapons, when they explode over cities and essentially burn these cities with firestorms, all that smoke was up into the upper atmosphere. In the case of this particular scenario, 37 million tons of soot.
Wow.
And it blocks out the sun across the whole planet, not just South Asia. It drops temperatures across the entire planet, an average of about 5 or 6 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
And in the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures drop up to, going back into Fahrenheit, that we're all used to, the temperatures drop almost 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Under these conditions, there is an enormous decline in food production across the entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first 2 years after this war, the study indicates 2 billion people, a quarter of the human race, would starve to death, including 130 million people here in the United States. Now, the famine would continue beyond 2 years. The study only went out that far. So we have to understand that a war between India and Pakistan has the ability to destroy our country, as we know it, to kill off a quarter of the human race, and essentially to end civilization as we know it.
Wow.
It wouldn't be the extinction of our species necessarily, although we don't know what further conflict would arise in this horrible situation. But even if there were no further use of nuclear weapons, the death of 2 billion people, human civilization doesn't survive that. No civilization in our history has ever withstood a shock of that magnitude.
Wow.
And we have a very complex, delicate, interrelated economic system that we all depend on, and there's no reason to think this is going to survive.
Mm.
So that's part of the story. Now, the rest of the story is what happens if the US and Russia go to war.
Right.
And it's a similar scenario, but even worse. In the first afternoon, maybe 200 to 300 to 400 million people dead. Those of us here in the United States who survived that first day would be living in a world devoid of all the things that we rely on to keep ourselves alive. There'd be no electric grid. There'd be no cell phones. There'd be no internet. There'd be no food distribution system. There'd be no public health system. There'd be no law and order. There'd be no banking system. And in the months following this attack, most of us who didn't die in the first day would also end up dying from starvation, from famine, from radiation poisoning, from epidemic disease. But again, that's just the direct effects of the countries that fight the war. the war between the United States and Russia drops temperatures across the world about 18 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
In the interior regions of North America, the temperatures dropped 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
That's as cold as the coldest moment in the last ice age. And if this happens, we're going to see the collapse of all of the ecosystems which have developed since the end of that ice age. Food production across the entire planet is essentially going to stop. And in the first 2 years, something over 6 billion people are going to die of starvation.
Wow.
And again, the famine will continue beyond those first 2 years, but that's as far as the study went. When we think about nuclear war, we think bad. We don't usually think this.
Right.
And it's very hard for us to think about this. It's hard for us to get our arms around it. I mean, this is a world beyond our worst imaginings. And that's part of the problem, because until we are able at some level to understand just how great the danger is, we're not going to appreciate just how important it is to do something about it.
Right. Well, that's such a great point. And so prescient, given our current circumstances, in Connecticut, there are a number of military contractors. Of course, you've got Sikorsky, you've got General Dynamics, there's nuclear submarines in Groton. So we often think, well, we're not New York or Boston, we'll probably be okay here. But the reality is there are potentially a lot of places that could be military targets in a nuclear war.
There are many targets here in Connecticut in the event of a nuclear war. But it almost doesn't matter.
Right.
Even if Connecticut somehow or other got left off the target list, everyone in Connecticut's going to die.
Right.
There will be almost no survivors here in the United States in a war between the United States and Russia. There may be a handful of people in Alaska or Montana who get through this. But basically, we're all going to die. It doesn't. The final point I think people need to understand is this doesn't have to be. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. We made these. It's not as though like an asteroid's coming at the planet. There's nothing we can do about it. We know how to take these weapons apart. They're little machines. They're about the same size as the chairs we're sitting in, Matt. And we've already dismantled more than 50,000 of these warheads. Mm-hmm. We know exactly how to do it. If a decision were made, if the U.S. and Russia and China were able to work out an agreement and a timetable for dismantling their weapons, so that we all knew that all three of us and all the other nuclear weapon states were doing what they're supposed to according to schedule, we could have all these weapons gone in 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Wow. Well, you've been doing this work for quite a long time. I'm curious of your perspective of our political leaders. Do you think that they're taking this as seriously as they ought in our current moment? And what do you think it would take to get them to take the threat of nuclear annihilation more seriously?
No, I don't think that they're taking this seriously enough at all. And I don't think they ever have. There have been a few moments when they scared themselves, and for a brief period of time, the leadership did sort of get it. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, both Kennedy and Khrushchev really seemed to sober up very quickly and to understand how dangerous the situation was. And they made some important progress in the year following the Cuban Missile Crisis before Kennedy's assassination. Same thing happened in the mid-1980s. We almost went to nuclear war twice in 1983. Mm. We came within minutes on 2 occasions. And both Gorbachev and Reagan were profoundly shaken up by this. And they sat down less than 2 years later and said nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought, which was a complete change in the nuclear policy of both countries, which had been actively preparing to fight and in their minds win a nuclear war. So there have been these brief moments when the nuclear threat has gotten the attention it needs. But by and large, throughout most of the nuclear weapons era, our leaders have been able, just like all of us, to deny the reality, to put it out of mind, and to trust that we were going to survive somehow. And today I think there's a sense, it's been almost 80 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There hasn't been another nuclear war since then. I think many people think, well, this is the way the world is. It's okay. Mm-hmm. But it's not. Mm-hmm. We're not here because we know what we're doing. Robert McNamara, I think, summed this up very, very powerfully when he said, essentially, it's not because we have sound policies. It's not because we have wise leaders. It's not because we have perfect technology. We're here today because, and I'm quoting him now, we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war. Mm-hmm. And we need to understand that. We're only alive today, all of us, because we've been unbelievably lucky. And the current policy of the United States and Russia and China and the other countries that have nuclear weapons is really nothing more than a hope for continued good luck, which is pretty crazy. You don't stake the future of the world on a belief that you're going to be lucky. So how do we change that? How do we get the leadership to understand both the enormity of the danger they face, the immediacy of the danger they face, and the fact that we can get out of this bind? I think we have to try many different things. We need to try talking to them directly. And in the 1980s, we were able to sit down with Gorbachev and with Reagan, we meaning the physicians movement, and have a serious conversation with them about what was going to happen. And it was kind of scary because they didn't know what was going to happen until we talked to them. They didn't understand it fully. I think there's somewhat the same situation today. So we need to try to reach out directly to the leadership. But we were only able to get those meetings with Gorbachev and Reagan because millions of people were in the streets and in their communities demanding a change in nuclear policy. And so the main thing we need to do is to build a movement in this country to get the entire citizenry, or at least a large portion of it, to understand the urgency of dealing with this problem. And to get them to start making a lot of noise. And we've organized a campaign to do that. We're trying to build a movement. It's called the Back from the Brink campaign. It has a terrific website, preventnuclearwar.org, which people can visit, that explains how this campaign is working. We call in this campaign for the United States to change its nuclear policy, to begin negotiations with the other 8 states that have nuclear weapons, and we are asking people around the country, communities around the country, to endorse this call. We're asking cities and towns to do it, we're asking states to do it, we're asking individual non-governmental organizations to do it. And it's been relatively successful so far. There are 8 state legislative bodies, both houses in Rhode Island, Oregon, and California, the Senate in Maine, the Assembly in New Jersey, that have passed resolutions endorsing this call for the U.S. government to begin negotiations to eliminate its arsenal. We've gotten over 70 cities and towns across the country to do this, including major cities like Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Des Moines. We have a resolution in Congress that has 44 co-sponsors at this point, although none of the Connecticut congressional delegation have signed on yet as co-sponsors of this resolution. It's HRES 77, and we have been working, trying to convince the members of the Connecticut congressional delegation to join as co-sponsors with this resolution. We hope that we'll be successful. We've gotten 480 organizations around the country, both national and local groups, to endorse this call. And I think we're making some very significant progress. But this movement needs to get much bigger and needs to do it quickly.
Right. Well, that's impressive and incredible, and it's amazing that there's not more visibility in the mainstream media on these things. Maybe there is some, but not nearly enough. I think we probably would agree on that. I'm curious for the folks out there who have a really hard time wrapping their mind around the devastation, and maybe they put their defenses up when they hear we're all going to die, because it's easier to put your defense up than think about that. Maybe we could talk about this slightly in a more economic sense, the opportunity cost. We spend around $51 billion a year to maintain these nuclear weapons. We could do many other great social things, alleviate much suffering in this country, maybe even around the world, with some of that money. As a physician for social responsibility yourself, can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it? What's the opportunity cost for having these? Of course, we know at the end of human life as we know it, it's quite a big cost. But just thinking in terms of what we spend and what we could be spending that money on from your perspective as a physician.
Yeah, every day we're wasting enormous sums of money. There are different estimates of what the budget on nuclear weapons is. I think the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons on their website, I think, is pegging it for the U.S. at about $50 billion this year. The Los Angeles chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility has been tracking this annually for several decades, and they put the cost closer to $90 billion if you figure in some of the indirect costs of the nuclear enterprise. This is an obscene amount of money to be wasting on weapons which we hope will never be used. And at a time when we don't have when there are millions of people in this country that don't have health insurance, millions of people who go to bed hungry at night, millions of people who do not have adequate housing, and probably several million people who don't have any housing at all. It is a scandalous waste of resources, and we need to appreciate that as well. I think that's an important way of looking at it. This is an argument which sometimes I think is particularly persuasive to city councilors and state legislators who are grappling with how they're going to pay the essential services that they need to provide to their constituents. And they don't have the money to do it because it's all going to the Pentagon. And I think that's an important and useful way also to look at this problem. But from my perspective, as you were suggesting, it's not really the key issue here. The key issue is, and we do try to deny it, but we have to make sure that we don't. We have to understand what is at stake here. If we don't get rid of nuclear weapons, it is not a question of if they're going to be used. It is only a question of when they're going to be used. We have come so close on so many occasions. This is not a stable situation that we are living in right now. And if these weapons are used, there's not going to be a second chance. It's going to be the end of everything that we care about. It's like the climate crisis. We don't want to think about it because it is such a big problem. But if we look not just at how big the problem is, but how relatively easy the solution would be, I think maybe we would have a different perspective on it. Getting rid of nuclear weapons is not going to be that difficult. If the leadership of the United States and Russia and China make a decision that the risk of maintaining nuclear arsenals is too great, that we need to get rid of these weapons, they can do it, and they can do it quickly. And our job, convincing with that, well, yes, that's going to be a big job. We don't have millions of people marching in the streets today. But in 1980, we didn't have millions of people concerned about this issue either.
Right.
2 years later, in 1982, 1 million people, literally, gathered in Central Park, the largest demonstration in U.S. history,
Wow.
to demand an end to the Cold War arms race. It was all built in a very short period of time. And I think we can do the same thing again today if we put our mind to it, if we understand the need to do this. We have tools now that we didn't have in the 80s. We have social media that make it easier to reach people. We used to have to do phone trees. We didn't have email. We didn't have social media. We didn't have the internet at all. It is not as huge a task, I think, as people might fear. Certainly, if you look at it, what can one person do? Yeah, that can be kind of overwhelming. But this is not something that you or I are going to do alone. No one of us is expected to solve this problem alone. But each of us needs to do that part of the job which is ours to do. And we need to reach out to the communities that we already belong to. So, for example, the 480 groups that have joined the Back from the Brink campaign, most of the national faith communities have joined this. The Quaker movement has, the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Congregational Church, the Unitarian Church, the Episcopal Church, Pax Christi within the Catholic community, the Islamic Society of North America, the Reconstructionist Jewish movement, Soka Gakkai, the Buddhist group, have all joined this effort. But also, lots of local faith communities have, individual churches. And that's an easy starting place for someone who's concerned about this. If you belong to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, go to your local religious community and get them to join this campaign. If you belong to an organization like Veterans for Peace, which nationally does belong to this campaign,
Yes.
Figure out what the rest of your Veterans for Peace community can do. What are the other connections that it has? What other communities do members of Veterans for Peace belong to that they can reach out to? Do they belong to a labor union that they can get to endorse the campaign? Do they belong to an environmental group that they can get to endorse the campaign? And I think if we adopt that kind of a strategy, this campaign can grow very rapidly, as the movement did in the 1980s. It really went from 0 to 60 in 2 years.
Wow.
And we can do the same thing today.
What do you think motivated people then to join the movement? And how do you think we can use that now to motivate people?
I think it really was fear. We're told sometimes that fear is not a good motivating force, but it turns out it really is. And it's very important. It's good to be afraid of fire. That's what keeps us from putting our hands into flames. It's good to be afraid of heights. That's what keeps us from jumping off of tall buildings and stuff. Um, People in the 1980s got it. They really understood that nuclear war was possible, and they really understood how bad it was going to be.
Mm.
And I think we're seeing a bit of that happening now. There's been a real change so far just in this year. The New York Times, which used to totally dismiss the nuclear issue, I mean, they never paid any attention to it. They're running a year-long series now called At the Brink, which calls explicitly for the elimination of nuclear weapons, a position which they used to deride as naive and fanciful. The same week that they published the first article in that series, Ernest Moniz, the former Secretary of Energy, the U.S. government agency which builds the nuclear weapons, had an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times calling for the elimination of all nuclear weapons, the weapons his own agency had built. There's a book out called Nuclear War, a Scenario by an author named Annie Jacobson, which is a very powerful description of how a nuclear war could happen and how bad it would be in the first hour. She doesn't go beyond that in her book. It's a terrific book, a very easy read, and it's gotten a great deal of publicity. There are book clubs that are going to be reading it this month and next month, focusing on this book and what it means and what it implies for what people now need to do to keep this from happening. So we're seeing some real stirring on this issue, and we need to just keep moving that along. We need to talk to our members of Congress and get them to endorse H.R. 77. We need to get cities and towns in Connecticut which have not passed back from the brink resolutions yet to pass resolutions endorsing the call for the U.S. to negotiate with the other nuclear weapon states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. The campaign is not calling on the United States to disarm unilaterally. It's calling on the United States to exercise leadership for universal disarmament, to be the force that brings all the countries that have these weapons together in a common understanding of the suicidal nature of current nuclear policy.
Well, that's a really interesting point. And as someone who worked on Capitol Hill for 6 years as a peace lobbyist, I know a lot of times the defense industry, which is very well resourced, you'd be shocked to know, better well resourced than a Quaker lobby in the public interest. There's a real reluctance to cut a penny from anywhere.
Yep.
And there's often, I've heard this on the nuclear issue in the past for sure, there's this pivot they'll do, well, we're going to get rid of some nuclear weapons, but we're going to refurbish them. We'll make them safer. We'll make them better. Tell us how that's wrong-headed. I know you've touched on it some, but...
Well, the U.S. is planning to spend between $1.7 and $2 trillion over the next 30 years. I would use the word enhancing every aspect of our nuclear arsenal, replacing the current weapons with weapons that are designed to last for 40 or 50 or 60 years, as though we are going to be here in 40 or 50 or 60 years if we don't get rid of these weapons. And the defense contractors are very smart. They have farmed out the production of their weapon systems so that there are components produced in almost every congressional district in the country. And the argument is made that these are important jobs. The fact of the matter is that money spent on nuclear weapons would generate far more jobs per dollar if it was spent on almost anything else. And so we need to have a mindful conversion. There are many people whose livelihoods depend on manufacturing nuclear submarines, here in Connecticut, for example.
Right.
We can't abandon those people. We need to transition them, but we need to do that. We need to, I'm not sure what the best plan would be. This is not my area of expertise, but I suspect that the people who are building nuclear submarines today could be building giant ocean-going turbines to generate power instead. And we need to make those kinds of plans to have a conversion to a peace-based economy that does not squander money on weapons that we hope will never be used, but instead produces products which we desperately need. And it is a problem because the lobbying is intense. The defense industries are incredibly well-resourced. They have all that money that they get every year from the government. Some of that they just turn around and use to convince members of Congress to keep supporting their pet projects. We need to point out that that is wrong fundamentally, and it's wrong economically as well. The economy would do much better if this money were being spent on things that we really need, that provide security in people's daily lives, and we need to figure out how to make that transition in a way which does not undercut the livelihood of the people who are currently building the weapons, the individual workers.
Oh, that's such a good point, and one that I think is often left out of the discussion in the peace movement. If we switch the way we do things and people become unemployed, what happens, right? But I like to say it was once, when there was a transatlantic slave trade, it was once a job to take a boat with people and enslave them and bring them to the Americas. We decided that was an unethical and an immoral job, and we don't have it anymore, right? But to your point about finding a way for these workers to do something else. There's no shortage of problems or opportunities we have in this country, whether it's high-speed rail or, as you point out, turbines to produce clean energy. So that's really important. Tell our audience how they can take action. You've mentioned was it Res 77?
Right.
Is there a companion Senate bill that we can get on Murphy and Blumenthal's case about? How should we look to that?
There is
action?
not at this point in this session of Congress a Senate counterpart to HRS 77. I hope there will be one in the new Congress in January, and it would be great if Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal helped to introduce that.
Absolutely.
So people can be talking to them about that now. HRS 77, there will be a new version of that, and have a different number, unfortunately, in the new Congress.
Of course.
But in the meantime, the 5 members of the Congressional Delegation of Connecticut, every one of them should be sponsors of HRS 77, and they should be sponsors of the new version when that's introduced in January. And they should help to introduce that. So that's one thing people can do, is to contact the members of Congress and urge them to take that step. Most of the communities in Connecticut have not yet passed resolutions at the municipal level. So it would be great for people living in Hartford to get the Hartford City Council to pass a resolution endorsing the Back from the Brink platform, as many cities around the country have already done. And again, this is something that is often best done not by an individual, but by a community of people. So I think one of the key things for people to do is to figure out where they fit into this. What is it they can do? What communities do they already belong to, where they could initiate a conversation about this and try to get that whole group to join with them in taking action. The website for our campaign, the Back from the Brink campaign, preventnuclearwar.org, has a tremendous amount of resources on it. There are sample resolutions. There are stories about how people have gotten resolutions passed. There's a lot of background information about the medical consequences of nuclear war, and so on. And I would encourage people to visit that website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for this work you're doing. It's incredibly important. And I hope we will live in a nuclear-free future in the not-too-distant future.
I do too, and I think we can. And I look forward to us all enjoying that future, knowing that not only are we now safe, but that we've done something really great. And I mean, that's the final thing I try to tell people. When we look at this huge responsibility that we have to get rid of these weapons, and it is, every one of us who now knows about this danger, there's a responsibility on our shoulders. And it's a bit of a burden. But, every one of us wants to do something good with our life. We've been given the opportunity to save the world. What better can anyone ever do with his or her life?
You said it. That's number one. And thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure talking with you.
You as well.